Jamie, thank you as always for joining us here on SABC News.
Pleasure to be here, and good afternoon to the viewers.
Just as a start, your reaction, please, on the punishment or sanction given to the Minister of Defence, that is docking her salary for 3 months. Is that enough punishment? Is it too much? What is your view?
Well, I do think that the punishment actually is sufficient. I would disagree with those who say that it was too soft or too lenient. I think losing 3 months worth of income is a significant sanction. I think more importantly, there was a clarification that the Executive Members Code was violated and that the ANC does understand and appreciate the separation of party and state, which is the issue. The secondary issue around transparency in terms of should we or should we not see the report. I think those reports should be published if there are no material security issues in those reports, specifically in terms of maybe what was being discussed, what was the nature of the meeting. Because as we know, there are some defense issues happening regionally, for instance, the terror threat in Mozambique. Having said all of that, I think that the regrettable outcome of all of this is that the de minimis has become the major. And what I mean by this is that we have now spent a lot of time focusing on this own goal by the ANC, this violation of the principle of state and party. And we have now, subsumed the real issue which was at hand, the reason for the trip, because now this particular issue has gotten more oxygen than the original issue that we were dealing with. Yeah. And the reality is the cost of the continuing crisis and decline of democracy in Zimbabwe far outweighs the 1 million or however the estimate may be of the cost of the flights, which the ANC has committed to repaying. If we think about the migration crisis that has had an adverse impact on South Africa, we must be cognizant of that. If we think of the costs of the ongoing humanitarian crisis, the human rights abuses, the denial of the right to speech, the right of the media, as well as the right of political parties to conduct their activities, all of these things are what the ANC was attempting to address. And unfortunately, the issue has now become about the flight.
Yeah, but even in that case, and I want to stay on the issue of you saying we've now lost what the bigger issue, what the real big, the reason for this trip was in the first place, which you're certainly right in that regard. But a question that I think has also been posed is, well, wasn't the ANC usurping its role in any case? Shouldn't this have been really a government issue, and then we wouldn't have been here in the first place? Why do you think that it had to be a party-to-party sort of delegation? Why was it not really at a government level? And I wonder if that is really an issue, or is it not an issue really to you? But on the surface, should this have not been something that was really dealt with on a government level? I mean, if we say, and we've heard some pundits saying that there is a Zimbabwe crisis in South Africa, surely then that means that's a government issue. That's a bigger issue than just ANC having to deal with ZANU-PF, for example. I wonder what you think about that as a whole.
So I think that the reality is this was the softest approach that they could take.
Yeah.
Because if they had taken a state level response, that would have necessarily involved the Portfolio Committee on International Relations and Cooperation. And that is a parliamentary committee and one that is multi-party. So if you escalate the issue to that level, then now you cannot de-escalate it afterwards. So I think that what the ANC was trying to do was to find a soft way of sending a signal to the Zimbabwean administration that they can no longer continue to arrest activists, to arrest journalists, to intimidate their population. The results of that actually have been that most of the people who were under arrest in the period of the last month and a half were actually released on bail when they had been periodically denied bail by the regime, because there's a conflation of the state and the courts in Zimbabwe, which is actually part of the problem. Yeah. So I think that the ANC was trying to avoid a harsher engagement with the ZANU-PF administration, and trying to keep it at a party-to-party level was their way of trying to use an African diplomacy as opposed to a more Western type of diplomacy, because once it enters the confines of the institutions and enters parliament, it's no longer a one-party football. And then you have the EFF and several other parties like the Democratic Alliance who have been very critical of the ZANU-PF administration and who could have called for very harsh responses to the ZANU-PF regime. And the balancing act here is that, of course, you have to operate within the parameters of sovereignty that have been established by the African Union and SADC. Those standards actually are standards which we must all reflect on, but they are standards which the ANC respects right now. And to pursue a more harsh approach really would have fast-forwarded the nature of the Zimbabwean crisis in terms of how South Africa is intervening and mediating in that crisis. And I think that's something that the administration is not willing to do in the middle of a pandemic. The pandemic does change a lot of dynamics and makes all of these interactions more difficult. So I think this is why they approached it in this manner. And unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of thought around due process, which is how we find ourselves in this situation where a flight was used irregularly and now amends have to be made. But I do think that when we think about the bigger picture, this for me is not the big issue that some of the political opponents of the ANC are making it out to be. I think they're making a mountain out of a molehill. But I do think that the constitutional point has been protected by the president in a sufficient manner. He has shown that, listen, there is the separation of party and state. There is a sanction that is going to be, put in place, and there's actually going to be a repayment of the money. Yeah. So in terms of damage to the country, I don't think that there was any, but in terms of damage to the issue, I think that a lot of damage has been done now to the diplomatic work, because part of it required media scrutiny of the Zimbabwean crisis and not this burying of the issue. So I think the happiest people right now are the ZANU-PF regime, because now they can continue to do what they were doing without as much scrutiny as before.
Just in closing, as we wrap up our conversation, I'm actually taking a step back here. You did talk about, you started our conversation, you did talk about the reaction of, parties like the DA and UDM who were saying that the minister should have been fired. But interestingly, the IFP, though, had something quite different to say. They said that, the minister can't be the only one. Minister Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula can't be the only one that's, being punished for what happened, and that there's certainly a trail of people that should also be punished. And it seems as though the IFP is then saying that she's being treated as a scapegoat. What do you make of what the IFP has said, and really sort of different to what the other political parties are saying who had initially raised the issue? I thought it was quite interesting that the IFP had that to say.
Of course, this kind of decisions have many people in the value chain who are involved in making them. But I think we always adhere to that principle that the buck stops with the head of the institution, and the Minister of Defence here is the relevant head. But I do think that we must be a little bit recalcitrant when looking at a Twitter cancel culture approach to dealing with issues of this nature, because we cannot just be saying fire everybody, get rid of everybody, and let's make sure that we know everybody on the list who was involved in this decision so that we can get them dismissed. I don't think that this is the kind of issue that requires that kind of a response. It looks like it was a diplomatic own goal. It was a due process own goal by the ANC. They've addressed it, and I think that the manner that they've addressed it is sufficient. And I think that to continue to look for blood in this particular instance may be a little bit of politicking, which may not be quite warranted, considering the nature of the sequence of events and how the presidency has responded to them.
All right, Mr. Mighti, it's always a pleasure having you here on SA Today. Thank you very much for giving us your time, as always. Jamie Mighti, political analyst, they're weighing in on the reprimand by President Cyril Ramaphosa of the Minister of Defence. Of course, they're docking her salary for 3 months of what's been called the ANCism trip.